The old man had lived all his life on the edges of the human colonies, in a small settlement where people learned to survive rather than thrive. He had seen years of hardship, generations of humans struggle against nature, disease, and sometimes each other. Age had bent his back and turned his hair to silver, but it had not touched his spirit. There was a quiet strength about him, a calm understanding that life was unpredictable, and one had to face it with courage. One ordinary morning, the sky above his settlement changed. It wasn't the usual swirl of clouds or the distant glimmer of stars at night. A massive ship, black as night and shining like metal, descended from the clouds with a hum that shook the ground. Children ran to their parents, and adults froze, staring at the enormous craft. Its surface was smooth and cold, with sharp edges that seemed to cut through the light itself. The people of the settlement had heard stories of the Galaxy Empire, but they were tales told to frighten children. They never imagined it would appear here, in their quiet corner of the universe. The old man watched silently, sensing the danger even before it fully revealed itself. Soldiers emerged from the ship, moving in perfect formation, their armor reflecting the sun in sharp, blinding flashes. They were taller than any human, their faces hidden behind cold visors, and their presence filled the air with a suffocating authority. The people scattered, but the old man stayed in his place, calm. His eyes, though tired, were sharp and steady, as if he could see every movement before it happened. The soldiers quickly took control. They captured the residents with efficiency that was frightening to watch. No one could resist. When they reached the old man, they hesitated for a moment, clearly expecting him to break down in fear. They saw only an elderly human, frail, bent with age. They smiled behind their masks, confident that capturing him would be as easy as taking a leaf from a tree. One soldier stepped forward. "You are coming with us," he said, his voice deep and mechanical. There was no room for argument. The old man nodded slightly. He did not struggle. He understood the futility of resistance against such overwhelming force. But inside, his mind was alive with plans and possibilities. He had survived many storms in his life. He knew how to endure, and he knew how to wait. They led him onto the ship, the interior cold and metallic. The walls hummed with an alien energy, and the floor vibrated with the pulse of engines that could carry this massive craft across galaxies. The old man's eyes took in everything. He noted the guards' movements, the way the door sealed behind him, the unfamiliar symbols glowing faintly along the walls. Every detail mattered. In his long life, he had learned that the smallest observation could become the most important piece of information when survival was at stake. Inside, the ship was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers. The old man was taken to a holding area, a place designed to make humans feel small and powerless. The ceiling was impossibly high, the walls gleaming like black ice, and the lighting harsh and white. It was silent, except for the soft hum of the ship and the occasional footsteps of guards. The old man did not sit or lie down. He stood in the center of the chamber, steady and composed, as though he belonged there as much as the Empire itself. The guards observed him, whispering to each other in their alien language. They had captured many beings in their time, but there was something unusual about this human. He did not tremble, he did not plead, and he did not break under the weight of fear. One of the younger soldiers leaned closer to another and said, "He is just one old human. He will not last long." The old man, if he had heard them, did not react. Inside, a quiet determination began to grow. Days passed, though time on the ship was difficult to measure. Meals were brought, questions were asked, and the Empire tried to gauge his thoughts, his weaknesses. They wanted information about human colonies, their defenses, and their technology. The old man answered sparingly, giving them only the most basic facts and letting the rest remain a mystery. He did not fear them, because fear was a luxury he had discarded long ago. His mind was sharp, even if his body was old. The soldiers continued to mock him, their laughter echoing through the metallic corridors. They called him weak, fragile, a relic of a species they believed was inferior. The old man remained calm. He knew they laughed because they had never faced a human like him before. In his quiet way, he began to study them as they studied him. He noticed patterns in their movements, subtle weaknesses in their security, and the arrogance that blinded them to danger. At night, when the ship slowed in its journey, he would sit quietly and remember the stories of his people. He thought of humanity's history, how humans had survived floods, plagues, wars, and oppression. He remembered the cleverness, courage, and resilience that had allowed humans to endure against all odds. He knew that what the Empire saw as weakness was, in reality, patience, strategy, and the ability to rise when the moment demanded it. One day, the ship's captain came to see him personally. The old man was brought before a large chamber filled with high-ranking officials of the Empire. They were confident, towering over him in their ceremonial robes and shining armor. They expected fear, perhaps tears, certainly submission. Instead, they found only calm eyes looking back at them. The captain spoke first, mocking him openly. "You are just an old human," he said. "Your people are weak and small. Tell us why we should even care about your kind." The old man did not flinch. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of his years and the experience of countless generations. "Your arrogance blinds you," he said slowly. "You believe that age and size determine strength. You are wrong. You have underestimated humans for centuries. We are not what you think we are." The officials laughed, a deep, echoing sound that filled the chamber. They saw only the frailty of his body, the trembling of his hands, the silver hair that marked the passage of time. To them, he was nothing more than a curious distraction, a relic to amuse themselves. But the old man's mind was working faster than they could imagine. Every word, every glance, every moment was being measured, stored, and prepared for a time when it would matter most. He did not argue further. There was no need. In the calm of his composure, he sent a quiet signal to his people across the colonies. It was a signal of resilience, a reminder that humans were never truly defeated, no matter how bleak the situation seemed. The laughter of the Empire only strengthened his resolve. It reminded him that the greatest weapon was not anger or revenge, but the patient determination to endure and to strike when the time was right. As the days went on, the old man's presence became an enigma to the Empire. They could not understand why he did not break under their scrutiny, why he did not beg for mercy, why he did not plead for his life. He was a puzzle, a challenge that irritated them as much as it intrigued them. And in that irritation, the seeds of future consequences were quietly taking root. The old man's life had prepared him for moments like this. He had survived hardships that would have destroyed lesser beings. He had learned patience, observation, and the power of quiet resistance. Though they laughed at him now, he knew that laughter was temporary. Strength, patience, and the courage to endure were eternal, and in the quiet, unassuming way that only humans could manage. He was already preparing the first steps of a plan that would change everything. By the time the first week on the ship had passed, the Empire still did not understand him. They saw only age, frailty, and quietness. They believed they had won. But the old man had learned something important in his long life. Victory is never final, and underestimation is the most dangerous mistake an enemy can make. He waited, studied, and planned. And in the silence of the holding chamber, surrounded by guards who thought him weak, the old man smiled faintly to himself. He knew that their laughter would one day turn to fear. He knew that humans, no matter how small or old, could rise when the moment demanded it. The old man had grown used to the cold, metallic hum of the Empire's ship, but he never allowed himself to feel comfortable. Every corridor, every shadow, every glance from a guard was a reminder that he was a captive. The Empire continued to treat him with amusement, believing that he posed no real threat. Yet the old man knew better. He understood that true power did not always come from size or strength. It often came from patience, knowledge, and resolve. One day, the Empire decided to make an example of him. A large chamber was prepared, more imposing than the one he had been brought to before. This room was meant to display dominance, to humiliate anyone who dared to oppose the Galaxy Empire. High-ranking officials, officers, and soldiers gathered, filling the chamber with their alien presence. Their faces, hidden behind cold masks, were all twisted in anticipation of entertainment. They believed that a human of advanced age would crumble under pressure, that he would break under ridicule and reveal secrets of humanity's defenses. The old man was brought into the chamber, walking slowly, with measured steps. His back was bent with age, his hair was silver, and his face was lined with the weight of a long life. To the Empire, this confirmed their assumptions. Here was a frail, powerless being, barely able to hold himself upright. They expected groveling, fear, perhaps even pleas for mercy. But the old man's expression was calm, almost serene. His eyes, steady and sharp, scanned the room, noting everything: the arrangement of officials, the positions of the guards, the subtle movements of their hands, and the patterns of their conversation. The chamber fell silent when he entered. The Empire's officials were confident that they had nothing to fear, yet there was a subtle tension in the air. The old man's calmness created an almost invisible weight. It was the kind of presence that suggested he had endured much and learned much. The officials laughed to break the silence, calling out to one another, mocking the human as they did so. "You are just an old man," one of them sneered. "Your species is weak, slow, and predictable. Tell us why we should not simply dispose of you now and be done with it." The old man did not flinch. His voice was soft, but carried a weight that commanded attention. "You judge by appearances, by age, by size. You believe these things define strength. You are wrong. Humans are not what you assume them to be." Laughter erupted through the chamber. The officials saw nothing in him but a fragile being, bent with age, easily ignored. They spoke to one another in hurried whispers, questioning why the human did not cower, why he did not beg. They assumed that with enough mockery, he would finally break. But the old man had no intention of proving them right. He remained calm, steady, and silent, letting their arrogance speak for them. The Empire tried every tactic to provoke a reaction. They ridiculed his species, describing humanity as small, weak, and insignificant compared to their vast fleets and advanced technology. They recounted battles where humans had been defeated, painting a picture of a species that was unworthy of respect. They expected outrage, shame, and fear. Instead, the old man listened quietly, his expression unchanged. Inside, his mind was working. Every word, every gesture, every sneer was being analyzed. He remembered the history of his people, the stories of survival, ingenuity, and courage. Humans had endured plagues that wiped out millions, disasters that destroyed entire settlements, and wars against impossible odds. They had risen again and again. The old man understood that these stories were not just history. They were lessons, a reminder that patience, intelligence, and willpower were far more powerful than brute strength. As the officials continued their mockery, the old man began to speak slowly, deliberately, his words cutting through the laughter like a calm wind. "You believe your technology and power make you invincible. You believe that your fleets and weapons are enough to control the galaxy. You underestimate one thing: the spirit of a people who refuse to bow, a people who endure no matter the cost." The room fell silent again. The officials were confused. They had expected fear, pleading, or anger, not quiet authority. His words were not loud or threatening, but they carried a weight that made them hesitate. In that moment, the old man became more than an individual. He became a symbol of defiance, a representation of a species that could not be easily crushed. The Empire was not accustomed to this. Their entire system was built on domination, intimidation, and control. They ruled planets and civilizations with fear, and they expected the same results everywhere. But the old man did not respond with fear. He did not respond with hatred. He responded with calm strength, a reminder that not all battles were won with weapons alone. Some were won with courage, wisdom, and patience. The officials decided to escalate their tactics. They brought in displays of human technology, showing what they considered the limitations of human engineering. They mocked the old man's people, emphasizing the supposed simplicity and backwardness of human inventions. They expected derision, laughter, and maybe even resignation from him. But the old man only nodded thoughtfully. He did not react with surprise or fear. He was quietly assessing everything, finding weaknesses, and considering possibilities. He began to speak again, his voice steady. You look at our machines and see limitations. You look at our numbers and see weakness. You do not see what humans have always relied upon: adaptability, resilience, and creativity. You do not see that even in the smallest victories, we find ways to endure, to survive, and to overcome. There was a ripple of unease among the officials. Some whispered to each other, questioning whether they had misjudged him. But they quickly dismissed the thought. After all, he was only one old human. What could he possibly do against the might of the Galaxy Empire? The old man's calmness, his quiet confidence, and his unshakable presence became almost irritating to the officials. They were used to instilling fear, to bending others to their will, and here was someone who resisted without struggle or complaint. It was a type of resistance they had not encountered before. They could not understand it, and that confusion was a subtle threat in itself. During these sessions, the old man did not reveal any secrets. He did not disclose any plans or weaknesses of humanity. He spoke only of principles, history, and the enduring nature of his people. He reminded them, subtly, that underestimation could be dangerous, that a single spark, no matter how small, could ignite something far greater than what they expected. As days passed, the old man's presence became a silent challenge to the Empire. Guards who once laughed now watched him with caution. Officials who had scoffed now whispered about him behind closed doors. He had not lifted a weapon, had not caused harm, yet he had changed the atmosphere of the ship. The arrogance of the Empire had met a quiet, unwavering resistance, and it unsettled them more than any display of power could. At night, in the quiet moments when the ship drifted through the void, the old man reflected on what had happened. He knew that the Empire would continue to test him, to mock him, and to underestimate him. But he also knew that their underestimation was his greatest advantage. Humans had always used this to their benefit, appearing weak, while preparing to strike at the right moment. He had survived countless storms, and he would survive this one too. He remembered the stories of human heroes, not the ones celebrated for victory, but the ones remembered for endurance. Those who faced impossible odds and did not give up. Those who held on to hope and courage when everything seemed lost. He drew strength from these stories, from the knowledge that humanity had survived and thrived in the face of adversity. By the end of this period of mockery, the old man had achieved something subtle but powerful. He had survived the Empire's ridicule, maintained his dignity, and reminded them, without threat or force, that humans were not as simple or weak as they assumed. He had planted seeds of doubt in the minds of those who considered themselves invincible. And deep inside, he began to prepare. He knew that patience was key. The time for action had not yet come, But when it did, humans would respond with a force that the empire could not imagine. The old man, once laughed at and dismissed, had begun to turn the tide not with weapons, but with the quiet power of resilience, intelligence, and unwavering courage. The officials continued to underestimate him, laughing and mocking, believing they held all the power. But the old man remained calm, steady, and observant. Every word, every laugh, every gesture of theirs was noted and remembered. He was preparing for a time when the laughter would stop, when the mockery would end, and when the true strength of humanity would be revealed. He had survived much in his life, and he would survive this as well. The empire might control the ship, the corridors, and the chambers, but they did not yet understand the spirit of a human who had lived long enough to see history repeat itself, and wise enough to know that the smallest spark can become a roaring fire dot in the quiet of the chamber. Surrounded by the laughter and mockery of a mighty empire, the old man smiled faintly. He did not need to speak loudly or shout threats. His calmness, his patience, and his unwavering presence were already a form of resistance. He knew that the time would come when the empire's laughter would fade, replaced by the sound of a force they had refused to see coming. The old man had endured the mockery of the Galaxy Empire, their endless laughter, and the constant questioning of his species' worth. Each day passed in that cold metallic chamber, and still he remained calm, silent, and observant. But inside, his mind was working tirelessly. He had survived countless trials in his long life, and he knew that now was the moment to shift from endurance to warning. He could feel the tension rising, a moment coming when the empire would finally realize that underestimation was their greatest weakness. One morning, he was brought into the Grand Council chamber once more. This time, the room was filled with the empire's most powerful leaders. They had grown bored with his silence, their amusement turning to mild irritation. They expected him to repeat his calm, empty answers, to offer no resistance, and to remain a fragile, harmless old human. Yet the old man walked steadily, his gaze fixed forward, as though the entire assembly held no power over him. The officials began their usual taunts immediately. "Tell us again why your people think they can resist us," one of them demanded. "Explain why we should not simply erase your species from the stars." Laughter followed, sharp and cold, filling the chamber like a storm. They believed they were untouchable, that their history of conquest made them invincible. The old man lifted his head slightly. He did not bow, he did not beg, and he did not show fear. Instead, he spoke slowly, clearly, and deliberately. "You believe your fleets, your weapons, your size, and your strength make you unbeatable," he said. "You think your victories define the limits of our people. You are wrong. Humanity does not exist to bow or tremble. We endure. We resist. We rise." A ripple of confusion ran through the officials. Some of them whispered to each other, questioning how a single old human could speak with such authority. The others laughed, assuming he was speaking out of desperation. But the old man did not shout, did not plead, did not attempt to scare them. He simply spoke the truth of what humans were capable of, truth forged over millennia of struggle, survival, and resilience. "You have judged us by appearances," he continued. "By age, by size, by the mistakes you think we have made. You believe weakness lies where you see it. You are blind. The strength of humans lies not in the body, nor in a single weapon, nor in a single fleet. Our strength lies in our will, in our courage, in our ability to endure and to fight back when the time comes." The laughter in the chamber grew uncertain. The officials looked at one another, some smiling nervously, some frowning. None of them expected words to carry power in this way. They had controlled worlds, conquered civilizations, and ruled countless beings. They had never faced an opponent who could command attention through calm determination alone. The old man's voice was not loud, but it carried weight. It carried history, experience, and the unshakable certainty of someone who had faced impossible odds and survived. One of the younger officials stepped forward, trying to intimidate him. "Do you really believe that words can protect you?" The alien demanded. "Do you think your empty threats will stop the Empire?" The old man's eyes did not waver. "These are not threats," he said, his voice steady. "These are warnings. You have underestimated humanity for too long. You have assumed that your power is absolute. You have assumed that fear and mockery can break a people who have endured far worse than you can imagine. You are wrong. And one day soon, you will see the truth of what I speak." The council members exchanged glances, a mixture of amusement and disbelief. To them, he was merely a frail human, a being who could be discarded at any moment. Yet something about his calm certainty lingered, a quiet challenge they could not name. In their arrogance, they dismissed it, believing they understood everything about humanity. The old man's mind, however, was far ahead of them. He thought not of this room, this ship, or these officials. He thought of the colonies, of the scattered humans who still lived under the Empire's shadow, of the ordinary people who had learned to survive in a hostile universe. He knew that words, when delivered with truth and courage, could ignite hope, and that hope could become a force far greater than any weapon. He spoke again, this time with even more conviction. "You have conquered planets, enslaved species, and imposed your will across the galaxy. You have believed that no one can oppose you. But you do not see the spirit that cannot be broken, the mind that never yields, and the courage that does not waver. Humanity survives, not because we are strong by your measure, but because we endure where others fall. And if you continue down this path, you will learn that patience, courage, and ingenuity can be as deadly as any weapon you have." The officials murmured among themselves, some frowning, some uneasy. They were not accustomed to hearing a single human speak with such authority, to feel the weight of words without threat or aggression. The old man had planted a seed of doubt, and it began to grow. They had assumed they knew everything about humans. They were learning, slowly, that they did not. The old man paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. He could feel the tension in the room, the subtle shift in the officials' demeanor. They laughed less now. They whispered more. And in their whispers, he could sense the first hints of unease, the first signs that his warning was being heard. "You see me, old and frail," he continued. "You see a single human in chains, surrounded by your soldiers, and you think this proves your strength. But strength is not always measured by what you can crush today. Strength is measured by what can endure, what can rise, and what can strike back when the moment is right. You have not yet faced the moment that will define your understanding of humanity. But it is coming. And when it does, you will remember these words?" The chamber fell into a stunned silence. The officials looked at one another, unsure of how to respond. Some tried to regain their composure, speaking in hurried tones, attempting to dismiss him once more. But the old man's calm gaze remained steady and unwavering. It was not fear, not anger, not hatred. It was certainty, and certainty has a power that even the strongest armies cannot ignore. For the first time, the old man noticed a subtle change in the guards. They had begun to move with more caution, glancing at him as if he were more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The laughter that once echoed through the corridors had faded, replaced by careful silence. The old man knew that fear had not yet taken root, but curiosity and caution had begun to. And that was enough for now. He remembered the stories of past human resistance. He thought of small rebellions that had turned the tide of wars, of ordinary humans who had done extraordinary things when faced with overwhelming odds. Those stories had been passed down through generations, reminding humans that courage and persistence could challenge even the most powerful. The old man carried those stories in his mind now, using them as both shield and weapon. The officials continued to speak, trying to challenge him with questions and taunts. But the old man did not answer in the way they expected. He answered in principles, in truths that could not be broken by weapons or intimidation. He reminded them that patience, ingenuity, and courage were powerful forces, invisible until they struck. "You will see the consequences of underestimating us," he said finally. "Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but soon enough. And when you do, it will be too late to prepare. You will see what humans can endure, what humans can achieve, and what humans can deliver when pushed to the edge. You will learn that laughter is temporary, but the spirit of humanity is eternal." The council chamber was silent once more. The officials stared at him, a mixture of disbelief, irritation, and unease crossing their faces. They had come to mock a frail old human. They had expected to see fear and despair. Instead, they saw resolve, wisdom, and an unshakable certainty that humans were more than they appeared. The old man was returned to his chamber after the meeting, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small smile. His warning had been delivered. The words were not loud, not violent, not threatening, but they had reached their mark. The seed of doubt had been planted in the minds of those who thought themselves invincible. As he sat quietly in the dim light of his cell, he thought of the coming days. He knew that the empire would continue to test him, to mock him, to push him to his limits. But he also knew that his words had shifted something, subtle but significant. The laughter had faded, and the first hints of unease had appeared. The old man understood that this was only the beginning. Humanity's true response was yet to come, and deep within him, the old man felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even a single voice, spoken with truth and courage, could make a powerful empire pause even for a moment. That pause, he knew, could grow into something far greater than anyone in the galaxy imagined. The warnings had been delivered. The time for words had not yet ended, but they had planted the spark. And when the spark ignited, the galaxy empire would see that humanity could endure, resist, and fight back in ways they had never expected. The old man had survived the mockery, the scrutiny, and the doubts of the galaxy empire. Every day they tried to break him with questions, taunts, and displays of power, but he remained calm and composed. His patience had allowed him to observe, to analyze, and to understand the empire's arrogance and weaknesses. But now, the time had come for words that could no longer be ignored. The time for a declaration had arrived. He was brought before the council once again, this time into the largest chamber he had ever entered. The ceiling stretched high above, filled with glowing symbols and strange machinery. The empire's leaders were all present, each seated in their elevated thrones, confident in their power. They believed this meeting would be no different from the last, that the old human would continue to cower, to offer meek answers, to entertain them with his harmless presence. As he walked into the chamber, his back slightly bent, his hair silver, and his eyes steady. The officials exchanged amused glances. Some whispered jokes among themselves, certain that they were witnessing the limits of human capability. Others prepared to test him with questions, curious to see what fragile thoughts might emerge from a single old mind. The old man's gaze swept across the room, taking in every face, every gesture, every weapon visible in the chamber. He did not tremble. He did not glance away. His presence alone commanded attention. For the first time, a quiet, subtle tension filled the room, a feeling that their usual confidence could not entirely dismiss. One of the council leaders spoke first, his tone dripping with disdain. "You have spoken much, human. You claim resilience, endurance, and courage. But what have you done to prove these qualities? You are old, alone, and powerless before us. Why should we take your words seriously?" The old man paused, then spoke slowly, deliberately. Because words alone are not always the measure of strength. They are the sign of what is to come. I speak not of today nor of tomorrow, but of what humanity is capable of when cornered, when threatened, when pushed beyond what you believe is possible. You think you have power over us, but you have not yet seen the depth of our spirit. Some council members chuckled, dismissing him once more. They saw only an old human, a frail figure, incapable of influencing even the smallest colony. But the old man was patient. He had studied their patterns, their arrogance, and their assumptions. He knew that a single word, delivered with certainty and weight, could change their perception instantly. He straightened slightly, lifting his head. You wish to test us. You wish to dominate us, to crush our colonies, to assert your will across the stars. You have believed for too long that the galaxy empire is invincible. But invincibility is an illusion. You will learn that human courage is not measured by size, nor by the fleets we command, nor by the numbers of those who stand with us. It is measured by the will to survive, the will to resist, and the will to fight back when the time comes. A hush fell across the chamber. The officials looked at one another, sensing a shift in the energy of the room. The old man had spoken with conviction, but not with threat. There were no raised voices, no flashing weapons, only the quiet authority of someone who had lived long enough to understand true power. They could feel it, though they could not yet name it. Then he spoke the words that would echo across the galaxy. You want war? Very well. We will deliver you war. For a moment, the chamber was stunned into silence. The officials, who had believed themselves untouchable, blinked in disbelief. They expected fear, supplication, or at most defiance in whispers. They did not expect a single human, old and seemingly powerless, to declare war upon their entire empire with such certainty. You misunderstand, the old man continued, his voice calm, measured, and deliberate. This is not a threat born of anger. It is a promise rooted in centuries of experience, in the resilience of countless generations, and in the knowledge that humans never surrender. You have mocked us, underestimated us, and treated us as if our lives and courage were meaningless. You will learn too late that this is a mistake. Whispers and murmurs spread across the chamber. Some council members tried to dismiss him, attributing his words to desperation or senility. Others, more cautious, leaned forward, curious to understand the source of his certainty. Guards, who had once laughed at him, now glanced uneasily at one another. They could feel the weight of the words, even if they did not understand fully what was to come. The old man continued, painting a picture of human resilience and ingenuity. You see us as weak because you measure strength by your own standards. Fleets, weapons, numbers, fear. But we measure strength differently. We measure it by courage in the face of despair, by creativity when resources are scarce, and by determination when all seems lost. You have assumed we are simple. You have assumed we are predictable. You have assumed we will bow. You are wrong. He spoke of the stories that had shaped humanity, small communities rising from disaster, ordinary people defying impossible odds, and entire populations surviving catastrophes that should have ended them. The council members listened, some with disbelief, some with irritation. They did not fully comprehend the depth of his words, but they could feel their meaning. Like the first tremors before a storm, you have tested our patience, laughed at our efforts, and dismissed our potential, the old man said. But humanity has survived far worse than you. We have endured plagues, wars, and the collapse of entire civilizations. And yet we persist. And now, faced with your empire, faced with your arrogance, faced with your laughter, we stand ready. You have asked for war. We will deliver it. The room was silent once more. The officials were unsure how to respond. They had never faced an adversary, who could wield words with such power, who could command attention without aggression, and who could inspire fear and respect simultaneously. The old man had shifted the balance, not with weapons, but with truth, experience, and the quiet strength of unwavering conviction. He stepped closer to the center of the chamber, his eyes sweeping over each member of the council. You think you are invincible. You think your fleets, your armies, and your technology make you untouchable. But you have overlooked the most important force in the universe, the will to survive, the courage to resist, and the intelligence to endure. You will see that humans, even when underestimated, can change the course of events in ways you cannot predict. A few council members shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the certainty in his voice. They had underestimated this human, just as they had underestimated countless others. But this time, the old man was not a threat they could dismiss. He was a warning, a symbol, and a declaration all at once. You have laughed at us, he continued. You have mocked our weakness. You have ignored our determination. But now, you will face the consequences. Not as individuals, not as moments of fleeting resistance, but as a force you have refused to acknowledge. Humanity endures. Humanity resists. And humanity fights back. The old man's calmness never wavered. His voice carried not hatred, but certainty. It carried experience, resilience, and the unshakable truth that humanity, no matter the odds, could not be conquered by arrogance alone. His words left an impression that the council could not erase, a mark of defiance that would linger long after the meeting ended. When he was returned to his holding chamber, the old man felt a quiet satisfaction. His declaration had been made. He had not needed weapons, threats, or aggression. He had spoken truth, and that truth had reached the ears of those who thought themselves untouchable. The seeds of doubt, caution, and fear had been planted in the minds of the Galaxy Empire. For the first time, the old man felt a shift in the atmosphere of the ship. The laughter that had once filled the corridors had faded. Guards moved with more caution. Officials whispered more than they laughed. His words had begun to take root, subtle but powerful, and he knew that humanity's response was only beginning. He sat quietly, reflecting on what had occurred. The declaration was not the end, but the beginning. Words alone could not win wars, but they could inspire courage, plant doubt, and ignite determination. He had delivered his message, and now it was up to humanity to follow through, to rise when the time came, and to turn the warnings into reality. The old man understood that patience would be essential. He would endure, observe, and continue to prepare. The Galaxy Empire believed they had power over him, but they had underestimated the most important strength of all, the human spirit. And one day soon, they would learn that laughter could turn to fear, mockery could turn to respect, and arrogance could meet resistance, the likes of which they had never imagined. As he closed his eyes in the dim light of his cell, the old man whispered softly to himself, not as a threat, but as a promise. You asked for war. We will deliver it. And when it comes, you will see what humans are truly capable of. The old man's words had left an imprint on the Galaxy Empire, though he remained in his cell, far from the colonies and fleets he had spoken of. Within the Empire's corridors, whispers began to spread, small at first, almost unnoticed. The officials, who had laughed and mocked him for days, now found themselves questioning what they had dismissed so easily. Some of them could not admit it aloud, but unease had begun to creep into the heart of the Empire. A single human, frail and old, had planted seeds of doubt that were growing quietly, steadily and dangerously. Meanwhile, in the human colonies scattered across distant planets, the ripple of the old man's declaration was beginning to reach those who had once believed themselves powerless. Communication channels, long monitored and often censored by the Empire, found subtle ways to carry his words. Messages that began as rumors soon turned into conversations, and conversations turned into plans. Humans who had long felt isolated, beaten down, and afraid started to see a spark of hope. They were not alone. They were not weak. And the old man's voice, though far away, became the guiding echo of a movement that had been waiting for a reason to rise. On one small planet, a colony that had been abandoned and overlooked by the Empire, humans gathered quietly in dimly lit rooms. They spoke in hushed tones, but their words carried weight. "Have you heard what the old man said?" One asked. "That the Empire wants war, and that humanity will deliver it?" A murmur ran through the group, a mixture of excitement, disbelief, and a cautious sense of hope. They laughed at him. Another replied, "But he has seen them, studied them, and knows what they cannot. If he says humanity can deliver war, then maybe it is true." Their voices were low, careful, but determination was growing with every word. For years, these humans had lived under the shadow of the Empire, believing themselves insignificant. Now, the idea that they could rise, that they could resist, began to take root. The old man's words were spreading faster than the Empire could track. In colonies across countless systems, humans were waking from a long period of fear and hesitation. Small gatherings began to form, where individuals who had once felt powerless started to exchange ideas, to plan, to teach one another strategies that could evade the Empire's oversight. The spark of resistance was subtle at first, hidden meetings, coded messages, discreet training, but it was growing. Each human who heard the old man's words became a node in a network that the Empire could not yet see. Back on the ship, the old man remained in his cell, observing everything. He knew the Empire would continue to test him, to mock him, to try to break his spirit. But he also knew that the seeds he had planted were already spreading. He had watched the officials' reactions during his declaration, seen the subtle shift in their behavior. The laughter had faded, replaced by caution and whispered concerns. The smallest signs of doubt were enough. Doubt in the Empire's invincibility would eventually become fear, and fear would weaken even the strongest. The guards, once confident in their control, began to move differently around him. Some avoided direct eye contact. Others watched him carefully, unsure whether his calmness hid some hidden power or plan. The old man allowed this unease to grow subtly. He did not need to intimidate or threaten them. His presence alone, and the certainty in his words, was enough to make them second-guess their assumptions. Meanwhile, in the wider human colonies, the impact of his declaration began to manifest in action. Small uprisings occurred on planets where the Empire had believed resistance impossible. Humans who had once hidden now organized quietly, sabotaging supply lines, communicating in secret, and preparing for larger actions. Each act of defiance was measured, calculated, and executed with care. The old man's warning had ignited courage, turning fear into strategy, and despair into determination. Leaders of these movements were ordinary humans who had learned to survive in harsh conditions. Farmers, engineers, teachers, and miners now became coordinators of resistance. They had no fleets, no massive armies, but they had something far more dangerous: knowledge of their environment, the determination to survive, and the ability to outthink an enemy that relied on arrogance and brute force. The old man's message had reminded them that strength is not always visible, and that even small actions could ripple outward into something much larger. In the Empire's council chambers, the effects of his declaration became harder to ignore. Reports began to trickle in: isolated incidents of defiance, minor uprisings, disrupted supply chains, and colonies refusing to obey orders. The officials were frustrated, confused, and increasingly tense. They had underestimated humanity for centuries, believing them weak, predictable, and easily controlled. Now, They were realizing that their assumptions had been dangerously wrong. The old man's words were proving true. Some officials began to argue among themselves. "We must crush these colonies immediately," one said, voice sharp with irritation. "They are small, insignificant, and can be handled quickly." Another replied, "Do you not see? This is more than small resistance. There is coordination, planning, and courage. They are not acting blindly. Something has changed. Something has inspired them." The old man, even in his cell, knew that his declaration had done exactly what he intended. The Empire's confidence was beginning to fracture. Where they had once assumed control, they now faced uncertainty. Where they had once laughed, they now hesitated. The faintest sense of caution was enough to allow humans across the galaxy to organize and resist. Meanwhile, the colonies were growing bolder. Humans began to share knowledge across star systems, sending messages of strategy, technology, and warnings. They learned from each other's successes and failures, improving with every attempt. The spark of rebellion that had started with words in a council chamber was spreading like wildfire. Fueled by courage, ingenuity, and the knowledge that they were no longer alone, the old man reflected on the events quietly, aware that his role was both simple and profound. He had spoken the truth, delivered his warning, and allowed the human spirit to awaken. The Empire had been amused, arrogant, and dismissive, but that same arrogance now made them vulnerable. Fear had not yet taken root, but curiosity, doubt, and caution were spreading. These were the first cracks in an empire that had believed itself indestructible in hidden rooms on distant colonies. Humans trained, planned, and prepared. They had no massive fleets or armies, but they had determination and intelligence. They had the lessons of history, the guidance of elders, and the spark that the old man had delivered. Small acts of resistance began to grow, each one a reminder that even the mightiest forces could be challenged by courage and persistence. The old man's message was clear. Humanity had endured for thousands of years by facing overwhelming odds. They had survived natural disasters, disease, and wars. They had built communities from nothing, defied tyrants, and continued to thrive even when hope seemed lost. And now, faced with the galaxy empire, they were doing it again. Across countless planets, ordinary humans were taking extraordinary actions. They were becoming symbols of hope, inspiration, and courage. And as their numbers grew, so did their confidence. They had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed. Now, they were beginning to see that the Empire's arrogance was their greatest advantage. They could plan, adapt, and strike in ways the Empire did not anticipate. Back on the ship, the old man felt a quiet satisfaction. His words had begun to work, not as weapons, but as catalysts. He had not lifted a finger, had not issued commands, and yet humanity was awakening. They were organizing, resisting, and preparing for the moment when they could confront the Empire on their own terms. His declaration, simple and clear, had sparked a movement that the Empire could not ignore. In the Empire's council chambers, tension continued to build. Reports of uprisings, sabotage, and defiance reached their ears daily. They had expected laughter, obedience, and submission. Instead, they were met with courage, strategy, and an enemy that refused to bow. They could feel the shift, though they could not yet stop it. The old man's influence was spreading faster than any weapon could reach, faster than any fleet could pursue. And so, humanity began to awaken across the galaxy. The spark of resistance grew into a steady flame. The old man, alone and confined, had delivered more than a warning. He had delivered inspiration. The galaxy empire had demanded war, and humanity was quietly preparing to meet that demand. Courage, intelligence, and determination were quietly aligning across countless colonies. And the Empire had yet to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding in the quiet of his cell. The old man smiled faintly. The human spirit was alive, unbroken, and ready. He had spoken the words, delivered the warning, and now humanity was beginning to rise. The Empire had laughed at him once. That laughter was fading. The first seeds of true resistance had taken root, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Galaxy Empire had believed itself untouchable, confident in its fleets, its weapons, and its iron rule across countless star systems. They had laughed at the old man, dismissed his warnings, and continued their oppression of human colonies. But the spark he had ignited had grown into a fire, spreading quietly but powerfully across planets, systems, and populations. The Empire was about to discover what humans were truly capable of when cornered, underestimated, and determined to fight back. The first acts of rebellion had already begun. On remote colonies, humans moved with precision, avoiding detection while striking strategic targets. Supply chains that the Empire had relied on for decades were disrupted. Communications meant to maintain control were intercepted or destroyed. Small, nimble human ships, previously considered insignificant, began to harass the Empire's larger fleets, using tactics that the aliens had never encountered. Every action, every strike, was deliberate, showing intelligence, patience, and courage. Word of these events spread quickly through the Empire, reaching the ears of leaders who were already uneasy. The laughter that had filled council chambers was gone. Officials whispered nervously to each other, unsure how to respond. They had assumed humanity would obey, would bend, and would submit. Instead, they faced a force that was growing in intelligence, coordination, and resolve. The old man's words had awakened a spirit the Empire had not expected. Human spirit that could not be crushed by fleets or weapons alone. In the human colonies, people felt a new sense of unity. Farmers, engineers, miners, and teachers, all who had once felt powerless, worked together to prepare defenses, organize resistance, and coordinate with other colonies. Even those who had spent years hiding in fear now stood ready to act. They had no illusion that the task ahead would be easy. They knew the Empire was vast and powerful, but they had something the Empire could never fully understand: courage, ingenuity, and an unwavering will to survive. On one planet, a young engineer adjusted the navigation of a small fleet of human ships, making final preparations for a coordinated strike against an Empire supply depot. She looked at her companions, all ordinary humans who had become extraordinary through necessity, and said, "We are not just surviving anymore. We are taking control of our destiny." The old man's words showed us that we can resist. Now it's our turn to act. The others nodded, determination shining in their eyes. They knew the old man had given them more than hope. He had given them purpose. The Empire, meanwhile, tried to respond. Fleets were deployed, planets were reinforced, and patrols increased. Yet every move they made was anticipated. Every strategy countered by humans who had learned to think differently, to adapt quickly, and to act decisively. The more the Empire tried to impose control, the more they discovered their own limitations. They had underestimated humans for centuries, and that underestimation was proving fatal. The old man, still confined to his cell, observed these events with quiet satisfaction. He knew he could not lead these actions directly, nor did he need to. His words had done their work. He had delivered the warning, planted the spark, and now humanity was acting. From a distance, he could see the Empire's arrogance faltering, its confidence shaken. What had seemed impossible to ordinary humans was becoming reality because they believed in the possibility, because they believed in themselves. Across multiple systems, coordinated strikes continued. Human ships moved quickly, hitting vulnerable targets and retreating before the Empire could respond. Sabotage on supply lines caused confusion and shortages. Colonies that had been silent for decades sent messages of resistance, sharing information, intelligence, and guidance. The old man's declaration, "You want war? We will deliver you war," was no longer just words. It had become action. It had become a force that the Empire could not ignore. In the council chambers of the Empire, panic began to replace arrogance. Leaders who had once laughed at humans now argued desperately about how to respond. Some advocated for overwhelming force, while others suggested diplomacy, unsure if it could even succeed at this point. But there was little they could do. The humans were no longer predictable, no longer weak, and no longer afraid. They had been underestimated, and that mistake was costing the Empire dearly. The old man's eyes, though old and weary, shone with quiet pride. He remembered the long history of humanity, survival through natural disasters, endurance through wars, persistence in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Every strike, every act of resistance was a continuation of that history. Every human who had once been timid or fearful now stood with courage, turning despair into determination and determination into action. Across the galaxy, ordinary humans became heroes. Pilots navigated dangerous routes to deliver supplies. Engineers repaired ships under fire. Colonists fought with whatever they could find, from improvised weapons to advanced technology salvaged and adapted for resistance. They were not superhuman. They were ordinary people acting with extraordinary resolve. The old man had always known that this was the real power of humanity, the ability of ordinary individuals to rise together and achieve the impossible. As battles escalated, humans began to take control of strategic points. Supply depots, communication relays, and key outposts that the Empire had thought secure were now in human hands. Each victory, no matter how small, inspired more colonies to act. The movement spread like wildfire, a network of resistance fueled by courage, planning, and the belief that humans could prevail against any odds. The Empire's response grew desperate. Fleets moved faster, reinforcements were sent, and attacks intensified. Yet each attempt to suppress humanity was met with careful planning, ingenuity, and adaptive tactics. The more the Empire tried to dominate, the more humans exploited their weaknesses. It became clear that arrogance had blinded the Empire to the true nature of their opponent. They had laughed at an old man, dismissed his words, and now faced a rebellion that could not be crushed by fear alone. Through it all, the old man remained calm. He did not celebrate in triumph, nor did he act impulsively. He watched, observed, and waited, knowing that the galaxy's reaction to humanity's resilience would unfold naturally. Every strike, every act of resistance, every strategic victory was a testament to the strength of a people who had never given up. The human colonies coordinated further, sending scouts, sharing intelligence, and preparing for larger operations. The movement had grown beyond isolated strikes. It was now a network of coordinated action across multiple systems. The Empire's fleets, once confident and untouchable, now moved cautiously, aware that they faced an enemy who could strike unpredictably and with precision. Humans had turned their apparent weakness into strength. In the Empire's council chambers, the mood was tense, almost fearful. Leaders debated, bickered, and blamed one another for underestimating humanity. The old man's declaration echoed in their minds. "You want war? We will deliver you war." It was no longer just a warning. It was reality. The Empire's arrogance had been met with strategy, courage, and endurance, and now the consequences were unavoidable. On a distant planet, a human commander looked at a fleet ready for a decisive strike. He remembered the old man's words and the countless messages of encouragement that had spread across the colonies. He understood that humanity's strength was not in technology alone, nor in numbers, but in the courage, unity, and determination of people who refuse to be broken. "We fight not just for survival," he said to his crew, "but for our right to exist, to live freely, and to show that we are not to be underestimated." The fleet moved into position, ready to strike at the heart of the Empire's supply network. Each ship, each human, acted with purpose and courage, guided by intelligence and experience. The rebellion that had begun as whispers and subtle acts of resistance was now a full-scale, coordinated effort that the Empire could not ignore. Humanity's war had begun, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Back on the ship where the old man had been confined for so long, he sat quietly, listening to reports of the strikes, the victories, and the growing human coordination. He felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. His words had sparked a movement, and now humanity was delivering the war he had promised. They were not acting out of anger alone. They were acting out of courage, intelligence, and the determination to survive. Every victory, every clever strike, every inspired action was a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. The Empire, once confident in its control, was now struggling to respond. Humans had proven that strategy, courage, and unity could overcome even the most powerful forces. What had seemed impossible was now unfolding in plain sight. A species underestimated, mocked, and dismissed had risen to challenge a galactic empire. And as the old man watched, he knew that humanity's story was far from over. The war had begun, but it was not just a battle for territory or resources. It was a battle for recognition, respect, and survival. Humanity was no longer the species that could be ignored. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would never forget the old man's warning that humans, when pushed, when cornered, and when united, could deliver war with unmatched courage and determination. In the quiet of his cell, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The old man had spoken, and humanity had acted. The laughed,